All right, let me get this pulled up. And I apologize for the confusion. Um, you know, Now that we've with the TA, I like to be there at the beginning and stay there for some of the labs, and then leave the rest of it to the TA. But it seems there was some confusion. So I'm still trying to pull this up here so we can talk about it. That's lab 3. Bear with me here. Lab 2. Independent. Lab 4. Here we go. All right. Let me scroll down here. I want to make sure I have it pulled up before I share the screen because there's no need to share any other things that don't need to be shared. Here we go. All right. That's what I needed. So let me share my screen. All right. And luckily, Burton, if I'm understanding this correctly, you said you were there and you did do that experiment, correct?
I did. I did it on Wednesday.
Perfect. Good. Well, hold on. That might be what I need. Let me 1 second. Let me pull this up. Why is this not working? All right. So Burton, you did do this, right? So this was like your work?
Yes.
Okay, good, good, good. So the way I understand this, because this is why, this part was, and I'm not just saying this to you, I'm also saying this, assuming someone's watching the video. So please don't feel like I'm patronizing you guys or whatever. I just want to make sure I'm describing my thought process as well. So when we started the lab, this part was blank, but this part I had filled in for you, hopefully to indicate how I want you to write this, right? So in the beginning, you had a beaker, right? There was water in the beaker, but not in the cell, right? Because at the very beginning, you just put the cell into the beaker, right?
Right.
Therefore, at the end, what this indicates to me is that yes, there was, at the end, after 30 minutes, yes, there was water in the beaker, but no, there was not water in the cell. Is that what this means?
Um. No. See,
Okay,
it was a miscommunication in there.
that's what I've heard.
That's what I took it as at first, but I was getting told no, that's not how you say that. So
Perfect. Okay. So you're saying there was water in the cell, correct?
right.
Good. I'll just change it for you if you don't mind.
Okay.
Good. So that's that. So for anybody watching this video, now when you go back, go in there and change your data, your table to say, yes, there was water in the cell. At the end, right? At the end, there was water in the cell. And of course, obviously, there was water in the beaker. It's not like the cell soaked up all the water. All right. So that was the biggest problem. But really quickly, just to be sure, let me look at this other stuff too. Iodine was in the beaker at the beginning because you put some drops in there, but not in the cell.
Right.
So, and to be sure, this is saying, yes, there was, at the end, there was some iodine in the beaker, but there was also some that went into the cell, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And I'm going to go ahead and skip ahead. And don't feel like you're under pressure because this is a week ago. We've had a lot going. So if you don't remember any of these questions, don't feel bad. I'm just trying to figure this out. But how did you know that there was iodine in the cell? Do you remember?
The color changed.
Good. Inside the cell, the color changed. Okay. And then, so like I would assume based on this that the water had like a brownish color to it, right? And then the inside had a purplish color to it.
Right.
Good. Perfect. All right. Salt. Again, to begin with, it wasn't in the beaker because it was in the cell. Right. So, and then what you're saying is that there was not any salt in the beaker at the end of it, but there was still, so it was obviously still in the cell.
Yes.
Okay. And again, no pressure here. Don't feel bad if you don't know this, but how did you know that there was no salt in the beaker? How do you know none diffused out at the end?
If I can remember correctly, I think it became cloudy.
Good. Okay. So and there's nothing wrong with this. Like I said, it's a while, so I'm not trying to put you on the spot or make you feel bad. But if the water was cloudy, that means that the salt did diffuse out of the cell into the beaker, right? Because you put those little silver drops into the beaker. Therefore, if it was cloudy inside the beaker, that means there must have been some salt that came out and went into the beaker. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. And that being said, and I know it's hard to remember, it's been a while, but to the best of your knowledge, do you still think then that there was no salt that diffused out, right? Because if it was cloudy, I would say yes, there was
Yes.
salt. So you would say this is a yes now?
Yes.
Yes, salt did diffuse out?
Yes.
Okay, good. See, we're getting to the bottom of this. All right. And again, you don't mind if I change that for you, right?
That's fine.
Okay. And then finally, starch, obviously, at the beginning was not in the beaker because you had it in the cell. And at the end, this indicates that there was still some in the cell, but also still some in the beaker, correct? I mean, not still some in the beaker, but now some. Okay. And again, not to put you on the spot, but do you happen to remember how you knew that there was? Oh shoot, yeah. Do you happen to remember how you knew? Oh wait. Now that I'm thinking about this, all right. So sorry, before I even put you on the spot. And again, you may have just misremembered. It's been a while, but here you were saying that you thought the iodine was still in the beaker, but it didn't change color, right? So if the iodine didn't change color in the beaker,
right, it didn't.
Then that means the starch did not leave the cell. Does that make sense? Because this is what you told me, and again, you said you put the iodine drops in the beaker, and it was kind of a brownish color.
Yeah.
At the end, indicating that there was still iodine in the beaker, right? However, like you said, it wasn't a purplish color. Therefore, that means there should be no starch in the beaker. Does that make sense? Am I understanding correctly?
Starch. Yes, that's correct.
Okay. So the data here should be changed to no, right? Indicating no at the end, there was no starch in the beaker, but there was obviously still in the cell. And the way you knew that was because iodine came into the cell. Is that correct?
Yes.
All right. So since no one else volunteered to help me, I mean, this is the best you can remember, and who knows, you might be wrong, but it doesn't matter. You're the one who's helping me, and sorry, I know Andrea is here too, but you're the one who helped me. So it doesn't, at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter that much. But this is now the official data for the, what'd you say, Wednesday section?
Yes.
Okay, Wednesday sections, Wednesdays, lab for table 2. Actually, let me even correct this even more. So, yes, in beaker, in cell. Just want to make sure everybody knows what's going on here. Iodine was in the beaker. There was still some left, but also, yes, some of it went into the cell. In cell. Salt at the end. Oh, wait. How did I mess this up? Salt at the end. You said was in the beaker. Excuse me. Yeah, was in the beaker because you saw cloudiness. Yeah. And we could just, and honestly, this is fine. I don't know why I didn't mention this earlier, but honestly, we're just making an assumption here, right? Technically, all the salt could have diffused out. We don't really know, but in this case, it's okay to make an assumption as long as we're indicating, we know it's an assumption. So in the beaker or in beaker, in beaker, in cell at the starch, again, at the end was not in the beaker, it did not diffuse out, which makes sense. It's a large molecule. But it was still in the cell. All right. And we already have the data. And before I open it up to you and start answering your questions, I want to point some stuff out for the sake of anybody watching this video. Basically, the questions I just verbally asked you, this is what I was getting at here, right? So how do you know that water diffused in the cell, right? And like you said, you're correct, right? The weight changed. I wouldn't say membrane, but of the cell. You won't lose points for that. But anyway, it increased, right? So that's how you know water entered the cell. How do you know if the iodine diffused into the cell? Exactly just like you said, and as you have written here, but you should be more specific before we grade it. Instead of saying the color changed, you should get specific and say, the color inside the cell turned to dark purple or something like that.
Okay.
because otherwise it could be like the color of what change, right? So make sure you're specific. Again, we've already said this, but I just want to mention it since we're making the video. How do you know if salt diffused out of the cell? Good. But in this case, again, make sure you make this correction before we get around to grading it. It isn't that the membrane became cloudy, right? But the water inside that beaker became cloudy, right?
Yes.
And that's how you know. And if you want to, go ahead and indicate. That's how you know salt did not diffuse out. And then finally, how do you know the starch diffuse out of the cell? And then, okay, and other people made this mistake too. I liked it. You're on the right track. But in this case, the silver nitrate was used for the salt, not the silver. I mean, the silver nitrate was used for the salt. It was the iodine that was used for the starch. So you'll change that. And then you'll also keep going, right? So yes, you did add the iodine to the beaker. And then in this case, like you said, like we've determined earlier, the starch did not diffuse out, right? So for you, your answer should say something like, I know that starch did not diffuse out because we put iodine into the beaker, and that the water in the beaker didn't turn purple, or something to that effect. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay, so basically everything you just verbally told me, that's what these questions are for. And I'm glad we're making this video because I think a lot of people were confusing these questions. They didn't understand what I was trying to ask, because this is a perfect example. I got a lot of answers like this where you just say, like, this is the procedure that we did, which is good. But instead of just telling me the procedure, but also tell me what were the results, right? In this case, we put iodine in and didn't see a purple color in the water. So that's it for that. That's the only thing I had issues with. And before we get back to the other stuff that you had questions about, Andrea, did you have any questions or anything you want to address? All right, I'll take that as a no. If you think of something, let me know. So then, Burton, did you want the other stuff you wanted to talk about? Was that supposed to be just between the two of us, or can she stay?
Oh, yes, it has to do with other some of my other assignments, and I want to try to figure this Google Doc out and things like that.
Perfect. All right. So then, okay. Well, thank you, Andrea, for coming. I guess if you don't mind, I guess both of you send me a little email if you don't mind and say, hey, I attended this non-mandatory meeting. I'm gonna give you guys a little bit of extra credit for doing that. So, all right, it's just us. I'm gonna stop recording.